Welcome back to Star or Shovelware, my name's Luke, and today on the channel I'm bringing you a gameplay overview of Hobo Tough Life on the Nintendo Switch, an urban-based survival game in which you get to experience the low life of a homeless person, rummaging through bins for scraps of food, begging for spare change, and stealing whatever you can in order to brave the cold and avoid sickness and starvation. The throne of the homeless king sits empty, but will you prove to be worthy to don the crown and reunite the fractured beggar community? Well, hit that like button, subscribe for more Switch content and reviews, and let's find out. So unlike some other survival games, Hobo Tough Life actually has a decent amount of lore and storyline going on in it, and the game opens with a cutscene explaining the current situation, with the city of Praslav recovering from political turmoil after the fall of the communist regime. The fallout from this resulted in an upsurge of homeless who, against all odds, were able to unite and build a community whose backbone was built around a central leader, the homeless king, whose throne now sits empty waiting for a new leader to reunite the fractured communities and usher in a new golden age of homelessness. Now, you play as a member of this community with no recollection of how you got there, but through interacting with other hobos you learn more about yourself and the city, and there's actually quite a lot of dialogue to read through, though there's also plenty of colourful language to keep things interesting. The people that you meet have their own agendas, and the central storyline follows your progression from just another bum to becoming the beggar king. That is, of course, if you manage to survive the whole ordeal. Overall though, from what I've experienced, it's quite decent stuff. I enjoy the hostility of the NPCs you meet and the way their attitude towards you changes as you help them out and build your reputation with them, and I felt the story elements provided progressional objectives for the player to work towards, as opposed to just simply dropping you into a sandbox world and tasking you with surviving. So Hobo comes with 3 game modes. You have the standard survival mode, a hardcore mode which bumps up the difficulty, adding a bunch of additional restrictions, and finally hardcore plus, a one death and it's all over mode, character deleted, start again. And I played the standard mode for around 4 hours, which is why I'm covering this with an overview video and not a fully rated review, but I can safely say that standard mode will likely provide more than enough challenge to start with for most people. You also get a choice of 4 different characters, each with their own perks, though to start with there's only one unlocked, and the game also features online multiplayer, with you able to set up a server for you and up to 3 other players to play in. Now, the main objective of the game appears to involve completing tasks for various homeless factions to build up your reputation and ultimately become the homeless king. But if you played any kind of survival game, you'll know the score with the genre. It's all about gathering resources, crafting things and managing your survival stats to ensure you don't die, and in this regard, Hobo Tough Life is no different. You'll be salvaging discarded food and drink and pieces of trash which you can then use to craft items and base components, and battling starvation, sickness and the cold, and of course other people. The core differences with this one though is the way in which you go about acquiring items, as there's no plants or animals for you to harvest, and instead you must root through trash, beg for money and spend what little cash you do have to acquire unspoiled goods from places like shops and supermarkets. The city itself though is a hostile place. Its people are unwelcoming and will often ignore you, it's quite easy to lose your bearings, and when night falls it gets really cold. There are also thugs looking to steal your shit, police who aren't too friendly towards you and your kindred, and in general it's just not a nice place to be, especially as a homeless person. To cover off the basic salvage mechanics though, you'll basically be dipping into bins and containers in order to discover anything useful, and this involves playing a little mini-game whereby you're presented with a board containing hidden tiles. Working your way out from the centre, these tiles are automatically turned over as you move, revealing either useless trash, consumable items such as food and drink or crafting materials, but there are also pieces of shrapnel among the trash which will not only damage your clothing and reduce the protection they provide, but also reduce your overall hygiene levels, eventually resulting in you becoming ill. Now, I quite enjoyed this unique spin on salvaging and the interactions that it brought. However, I wasn't a fan of the timing based minigame which occurs whenever you find a valuable item, and I just found it became extremely frustrating and overly time consuming. Aside from the bin diving though, resources and money can also be earned through begging, stealing, completing tasks for other homeless people, returning empty bottles to stores, and if you're lucky, wins on scratch cards. But in general there's some nice variety to the salvaging mechanics, and in addition to the open containers you'll also find plenty of locked containers dotted about the city, and here we get a lockpicking minigame which will be familiar to anyone who has played the Elder Scrolls titles, which I thought was a nice little addition. Now, when it comes to the character and survival mechanics, there's quite a lot of depth to these, but to start with, things like salvaging, begging, lockpicking and crafting all have skill levels associated with them which improve the more you partake in them, granting you passive perks, such as warning you about shard tiles in the trash minigame or improving your chances of successfully begging or stealing. And you can also unlock more powerful perks through training, providing your skill levels are high enough, which unlocks some additional areas, salvaging locations and dialogue options. Now, the game's survival mechanics not only see you managing your health, energy, food and water levels, but also temperature and dryness, morale, hygiene, sickness, toxicity, alcohol and toilet needs. And if any of these survival stats get out of hand, you'll usually start losing life and eventually die, which actually sees your inventory completely emptied and you're having to buy it back piece by piece with what little money you have left. And for me, this is where I feel the game moved from being a fun survival game to a hardcore slog with some overly complex survival mechanics and far too many interactions for me to be bothered to manage. Now, don't get me wrong, if you invest enough time into the game you can probably get the hang of things and learn how to manage them all quite well, especially when you've got a bit of cash under your belt. But as someone who enjoyed the hardcore survival mechanics of Green Hell, even those felt relatively tame in comparison to the mechanics in this one, and I really think Hobo should have taken a leaf out of that game's book and provided some customization options to toggle certain mechanics on and off, and generally make the game more beginner friendly and accessible. Now, due to me dying so much and losing all of my shit over and over, I really didn't get to experience the crafting mechanics much, but again they look to have quite a lot of depth to them. You can break down objects into the base components and then craft useful objects from them and base parts, and as you find new items you'll also learn new blueprints from them. But I was actually only able to craft a recycled cigarette from a bunch of discarded dog ends and a single shoddy roof panel which I was then able to place down in my base. Again though, for some reason the crafting involves that stupid timing minigame, and I felt this was an entirely unnecessary component. Overall though, if you enjoy your survival games and are looking for something to challenge you with a decent story component and a lot of depth to its mechanics, Hobo Tough Life may be the game for you. I personally did enjoy my time with it and appreciated the amount of work and thought that has been put into all its different mechanics, but for me it was just a little too hardcore and I really didn't have enough time or patience to put into the game in order to get good at it. So aesthetically speaking, the game looks very much last gen, with the city itself looking a little bland and uninspiring, and very little variety to its NPC inhabitants. However, the drab and dreary atmosphere of Praslav does lend itself to the gameplay and the overall theme of the game. It feels oppressive and overall not a very nice place to live in, which I feel really added to the immersiveness of this one. In terms of the graphical quality though, by Switch standards it's pretty decent. The textures are of reasonable quality, there's not too much in the way of visual bugs, and it seems to have been optimised quite well, so the performance is also pretty good. On the audio side of things, to be honest it's not too bad either. We get some decent voice acting, the sound effects and overall ambience of the city was good, and the game's music, whilst not being memorable, is pretty fitting. So overall, not too bad on the audio and graphics front. So like I said, if you're looking for a hardcore survival game to get stuck into and don't mind putting in the time and effort to learn all of its different mechanics and dying plenty of times along the way, Hobo is definitely going to scratch that itch and will likely provide a decent level of challenge for survival game veterans. If however you're someone like me who enjoys survival games but prefers to play them casually and doesn't like to hit the ground running, then this may not be quite the game you're looking for. There is however a lot going on in the game and a lot to like about it. It provides a unique scenario, plenty of depth to its mechanics and some decent base building to get stuck into, though I'd recommend bringing a couple of friends to share the pain with. And I'd like to say that the game is reasonably priced for the content on offer, however after only 4 hours worth of playtime I'd be reluctant to call that one. But all round I'd say it's not a bad little survival game. And so that just about wraps up this gameplay overview of Hobo Tough Life on the Nintendo Switch. So are you a fan of survival games, and will you be looking to pick up this one and take on the challenge of becoming the Homeless King? Let me know down in the comments section below. As always, if you enjoyed this video, drop a like, consider subscribing to the channel if you're looking for more Switch reviews as well as weekly deals videos, and as always, thanks once again for watching, take care of yourselves, and game on.